The American President Donald Trump not only imposed new tariffs on all goods imported into the United States yesterday, but also played strongly into the Kremlin's hands regarding Russia's war against Ukraine. President Donald Trump's administration threatened Europe with cutting off access to the United States arms market if the European Union gives preference to European manufacturers in the process of rearming the continent. The Pentagon issued a warning today ahead of the planned update of the European Union's military procurement directives. The department stated that they strongly oppose any changes that would limit the ability of U.S. industry to participate in defense procurement for EU member states. But the danger of such a move would be that the United States of America might restrict the sale of American products. Where are these weapons being supplied to the armed forces of Ukraine from under the Purell program? And this will not only weaken Europe, but could also leave the Ukrainian army without key types of weaponry. At a time when the Russians continue their offensive on the front and the White House is demanding that Ukraine surrender Donbass to Vladimir Putin. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pichi News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in, and all the announcements for releases on this YouTube channel are posted there as well, so I'll be glad to see you there. So today news came from the White House that at first glance seems to have nothing to do with Ukraine, but that's far from the case. I suggest we take a deep dive into this news. As reported today by Politico, the administration of US President Donald Trump has threatened to take retaliatory measures against European countries if the EU gives preference to domestic arms manufacturers in its efforts to rearm Europe. As is known, the United States Department of Defense has objected to any attempts by the European Union to restrict access for American arms manufacturers to the European market, and it warned that this would provoke a response. But the thing is, earlier the European Union really did allocate a huge multi-billion package for the rearmament of all of Europe against the backdrop of increasingly aggressive actions by the wild Russians. And the Europeans want to spend all this money on buying specifically European types of weapons for Europe, not giving these billions to America. Well, it got to the point where France and Germany and Sweden started competing with each other over who the Europeans would buy weapons from. That's how it is. The White House issued this statement, quote, "The United States strongly opposes any changes to the European Union directive that would limit the ability of American industry to support or otherwise participate in the national defense procurements of EU member states. A protectionist and discriminatory policy that forcibly drives American companies out of the market, while the largest European defense firms continue to reap huge benefits from access to the United States market, is the wrong course of action." And here I will immediately note that such a comment from the Pentagon or the White House highlights the paradox in the United States' approach to Europe. Although the Donald Trump administration has repeatedly told Europeans that it wants them to take on the main share of Europe's traditional defense, the US does not want this to happen at the expense of American defense companies. That is, on the one hand, Trump says, let the Europeans take all this on when it comes to conventional defense, but when the Europeans do take it on and say, okay, we are allocating billions, literally tens of billions of dollars for rearmament, but we will spend this money on our own companies. We have our own weapons manufacturers. Trump says, no, don't do it like that. Of course you should rearm, but buy weapons from our companies. At the same time, Trump himself imposes tariffs on European goods in order to develop American industry, but he really doesn't want the Europeans to do the same in return. And it's no secret that in recent years the European Commission has been trying to increase the share of European weapons in the bloc's arsenals and procurement contracts, preparing for a potential conflict with the wild Russians. For decades, Europe has been largely dependent on American military equipment, from F-35 fighter jets to HIMARS artillery systems and Patriot air defense missile systems. Almost two-thirds of the weapons imported into the EU come from the United States of America. And now, the current situation may show how ready European countries really are to pursue greater independence from the United States of America, which has become an increasingly unreliable partner in the Trump era. And now, it is expected that the executive branch of the European Union will present an updated version of the Public Procurement Directive. And here, the European Union is already giving preference to local companies in projects such as the SAFE program for providing loans for armaments amounting to 150 billion euros. Well as in the procurement of weapons that Ukraine can make using the recently agreed loan to Kyiv in the amount of 90 billion euros, and EU funds can be used to purchase military equipment only if at least 65% of the cost of this equipment comes from the European market. Well, and Donald Trump takes this very seriously. He didn't like it. He says, okay, we're developing our own industry, so why did the Europeans suddenly decide to develop theirs? That's not fair. And here we come to the most dangerous moment. So far, it seems like, well, Ukraine isn't really affected by this, or so it seems. The Pentagon, in its statement, warned that any inclusion of a strict clause on the purchase of European products in future public procurement legislation would trigger retaliatory measures from the US. Quote, if European preferential measures are included in the national procurement laws of member states, the United States will review all existing general exemptions and deviations from the laws. Buy American, provided within or in connection with these mutual defense procurement agreements. What does that mean now? Let me translate from diplomatic language to plain language. Basically, this means that the United States of America will, first of all, close access for European companies to its market. But also, Trump might take an even more shocking step to quickly, instantly stop this European Union initiative. The thing is, under this legislation, Trump is able to instantly ban American companies from selling any weapons to Europe. Europe, however, has not yet fully switched to its own weapons, so this would be a huge shock for them. And this will also become a huge problem for Ukraine because as of today, the United States does not supply Ukraine with a single shell directly, not a single one, not a single bullet, nothing at all. All American weapons that end up in the hands of Ukrainian armed forces soldiers are actually purchased by Europeans under the Pural program, who then transfer these American weapons to Ukraine. If Trump takes such a step, it will seriously undermine Ukraine's defense capability. At the same time, we shouldn't forget that 19 out of 27 capitals of European Union countries have signed an agreement with Washington that allows European companies to actually compete for certain contracts with the Pentagon. For example, the Italian company Leonardo or the Swedish, better known as Saab, sell their military products to the United States of America and the Pentagon buys them. And now Washington is calling on Europe to give up its independence from the United States of America, even though that's exactly what Trump seemed to be demanding. And to show the full duplicity of Donald Trump's administration's position, it's worth adding one more piece of news. Donald Trump announced today that he will raise the global tariffs he announced on Friday from 10% to 15%. After the decision of the US Supreme Court, which declared the mechanism for introducing global tariffs by the head of the White House illegal. And Trump makes the following statement, quote, as the President of the United States of America, I am immediately raising the global tariff on the import of goods and services for countries, many of which have been robbing the US for decades, with impunity until I came to power, from 10% to the fully permitted and legally justified level of 15%. The Supreme Court made an absurd, poorly written and extremely anti-American decision. The mandatory expansion of the area of casualties in the regions of Western North America to meet you in Devil's Promises. If you found this episode useful and interesting, you can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with your help. In the Far East, the public got stuck, covered by something overwhelming. I'm grateful for any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.